Bom dia a todos. Good morning, everyone. I'll speak in English, but we have also translation. My name is Julia Dias Leite. I'm the CEO of CEBRI, the Brazilian Center for International Relations. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the debate that aims to restore the conversation around the urgent need for nature conservation, a topic that affects the future of our societies and is becoming more and more pressing as we approach the expected COP30 to be hosted by Brazil in Belém next year. I would like to express my gratitude to the Consulate General of Ireland in São Paulo and for the partnership, Robert Jackson, who is here with us, the Irish Consul General for Brazil, for his invaluable support in making this discussion possible. I also would like to thank the presence of our special guest, Laura Burke, Director General of the Environment Protection Agency. It's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome. And also the presence of a very known partner, Isabella Teixeira, former Minister of Environment and a Board of Trustees of CEBRI, and who coordinates our program of climate and sustainability here at CEBRI. And also Maria Neto, who is a Senior Fellow of CEBRI and Executive Director of the Institute for Climate and Society, ICS. CEBRI, today we will have the chance to learn the best, the convergences, or also the difference between the strategy adopted by Brazil and Ireland in climate action. I now pass the floor to Robert to give his welcome words. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and those in person and those joining us online. Sorry. Firstly, I want to thank Julia and all of the team at CEBRI for the invitation to collaborate with you. I love your tagline, a rethink tank. The approaches that we've taken in the past perhaps don't work anymore. Even in the last 2 days traveling around Rio with Laura, we've seen some incredible approaches being taken here in Brazil. I'm not sure Laura's team will forgive us for the amount of ideas she's going back with for solutions that we've seen here in Rio that we could implement in Ireland. We are opposite sides of the Atlantic. Some people think that we have, climate change isn't affecting us. As Laura will tell you, it is, very definitely. The problems that you're facing, we are two sides of the same coin. We have similar problems, we have attitudes that we need to change, we have new approaches that we can take. We now have 80,000 Brazilian people living in Ireland in a small population of 5 million. So hopefully the creativity we've seen here will be embedded in Ireland. The solutions that we've seen here will be embedded in Ireland. And I know Laura will be able to speak to some of the solutions we've adopted merely as a menu. These are things we've thought of that some have worked for us, some Laura can explain, maybe not so much, but just to exchange ideas, exchange experiences. We all have similar problems with different aspects to them, but I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Laura, from Isabella, and from Maria. So thank you so much to CEBRI for this partnership, and let's rethink.
Hello? This one. Now it's working. I hope so, or I'm shouting here. So it's a pleasure to be here with the two persons who I understand and is important. They're people who are actually leading environmental protections in their countries, and Isabella as ex-minister and you as the director of the EPA. Brazil, obviously, as said, has a lot of opportunities to address climate change. We are a country with a huge potential for nature-based solutions. As we are approaching COP30, there is a big question on how we are going to be able to scale these solutions. And the challenges we have of balancing not only increasing the potential for, in our case, enhancing renewable energy, promoting the restoration and forest recovery that Brazil can offer as a removal for the global improving the ways we can promote also technologies such as for new fuels. Brazil has a huge potential with biofuels, with green hydrogen in the future and so on. So how can we lead to do this mitigation and at the same time be able to address the costs of impact of climate change that's already happening as well with us? The cost of impact of climate change in Brazil this year, the fact that this is happening more intensely and frequently, has already resulted not only in dryness and a huge inundation, but most likely next year in inflation. And I think that's what we are starting talking about. Next year, cost of food, cost of fuels, and our energy grid may be actually compromised in terms of production costs. And these are the kinds of reflections we are going to have to start having. And so the title of this discussion we have here is how to balance precisely, on the one hand, the need to have good policies and start internalizing how to address this management of nature and the opportunity that nature brings to us, and at the same time have the ability to respond to the impacts that are happening more and more. And I think we have different countries with different possibilities, but I think maybe to start with that, I would like to open to Laura to give a bit of reflections on how you are living this situation in Ireland and how we can get inspired here in Brazil. And then Isabella also put her reflections as ex-minister on, I'm sure, of what we needed to do or what has been the experience of balancing these two acts.
And I might...
Yes, that's good.
Okay. Perfect. I'm a little smaller than Robert, so and I have a presentation that hopefully, wonderful. First of all, thank you so much for the invite to be here today. It really is a privilege, and as Robert was saying, I've spent the last 2 days in Rio, and so many ideas and experiences I think are absolutely relevant to Ireland. But maybe first of all to talk a little bit about Ireland and my agency. So by comparison to Brazil, Ireland is a very small country. As Robert said, we're 5 million people, so and a land area of only 84,000 kilometres squared. So we are small. We have a population of 5 million people as compared to your over 200 million people, and our big capital city has 1.5 million people. So again, in scale, we're very different. And our climate is a temperate climate, really influenced by the Gulf Stream. However, there's lots of similarities, and at least 60% of Ireland's land cover is agricultural. So we're an agricultural country. It's grassland, it's cultivated land, and agriculture is incredibly important to our economic and our social profile. Ireland has been a member of the European Union since 1973, and the EU has been critically important in safeguarding Ireland's environment. Environmental legislation in Ireland is mostly derived from EU law, which regulates key things like waste, water quality, chemicals, air quality. So we're really very much linked with EU environmental law. And my agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, our vision is that we live sustainably in a healthy environment that is valued and protected by all. And this is the piece that we are 550 people, but unless everybody in the country understands the importance of the environment, we won't get the change that we needed. So we're an independent public body, but our powers and responsibilities are set out in national legislation. So our responsibilities are ultimately set by government, but how we perform those functions is independent. And in fact, in our legislation, it is an offence to try and influence improperly a decision of the agency. So as we were set up, that independence was right at our core, and we protect that and guard that. We're an environmental regulator, so we regulate industry. We monitor the quality of Ireland's environment, water quality, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and we partner with other organisations for environmental protections, for the environment to be improved. And ultimately, for us, Ireland's environment has an intrinsic value in its own right, as well as being key to economic success. Because Ireland, being an agricultural country and also a country with a lot of tourism, we rely on a good quality environment for those economic activities. And in the context of today's discussion on climate, we have a wide range of responsibilities in the climate area. We are the competent body for the emissions trading scheme and for the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We also do emission statistics, climate adaptation, climate science, climate research, and climate behaviour. So that's an awful lot, and I'll only touch on a couple of things today. But it's just a sense that these things have grown in importance in Ireland. And as Robert was saying, we all know that we are living in a changing world. It's not into the future, it's happening now. According to the EU Copernicus Climate Service, the first 12 months, the 12-month period to exceed 1.5 degrees warming as an average was February 2023 to January 2024. So we're living in a world of 1.5 degree warming. In Ireland, what we are seeing is our temperature has increased by approximately 1 degree over the last 100 years, with 16 of the 20 warmest years happening since 1990, and 2023 being the warmest year on record. So when we're engaging with people in Ireland, we're saying it's not that climate is something into the future, it is happening to us now. And what we're seeing, and the EPA published a climate change assessment earlier this year, which was really localising the 6th IPCC assessment into an Irish context. And what that is showing is that we've got the intensity and frequency of our flood events, our weather events, is already happening. We're having floods, we're having droughts, we're having increased wildfires in a country that didn't really have many wildfires, increase in invasive species, increase in coastal erosion. As a small island, we're seeing coastal erosion impacting towns and communities, and risks to food supply. And as well as an small open economy reliant on imports and exports in an increasingly interconnected world, we are also exposed to the climate impacts and policy responses in other parts of the world. So we don't work in isolation, we don't live in isolation in Ireland. As I mentioned, we are part of the EU, and the EU drives so much of what we do. As I'm sure you're aware, under the European climate law, EU member countries are committed to being climate neutral by 2050, and the EU aims to reduce its net emissions by at least 55% by 2030. It has already reduced emissions by 1/3, driven by a mix of policies and support measures, including carbon pricing, targets, rules-based approaches, as shown in this table. And for the purpose of this discussion, I want to focus on the pricing and the target tools highlighted, and how Ireland is doing, and maybe some of the challenges that we're seeing. And the first to talk about is the EU emissions trading scheme. So again, its carbon pricing has been key in reducing emissions around the EU since 2005, when the scheme was established as the first major carbon market, and it remains the largest one globally. There's 11,000 participants at a European level, of European businesses and aircraft operators. And it has had an impact. It's had a significant impact, with EU emissions from that sector reducing by almost 50% in the period 2005 to 2023. So a halving of emissions from those industrial sectors, while at the same time EU GDP grew by 24%. Therefore, you were decoupling emissions from industry and economic growth, which is always the challenge. You know, you can have low emissions if you have low economic growth, but what you want to do is decouple. So what it's showing, you can have decarbonisation and economic growth at the same time. And as the system matures and recent revisions come into force, the carbon market is also going to incentivise emission reductions from aviation, road transport and heat. And part of the market, of course, is to reduce emissions, but also it's around auctioning of allowances. And to date, over 152 billion euros has been raised from auctioning allowances. And that has been recycled into climate and energy projects across Europe. So the using of that money back into reducing emissions right across EU member states. And that's one sector, and of course then you've got the rest of the emissions, which are regulated under the EU effort sharing regulation. And for Ireland this is really important because it's emissions from agriculture, transport, residential and land use change and forestry. Looking to the EU ETS, Ireland is not a particularly industrialised country. As I said, 60% of our land is agricultural land. So in the EU ETS, there's only just over 100 companies in Ireland. Cement generation, for example, alumina, energy generation, food, pharmaceutical are also there. But within that sector alone, the emissions have decreased by 45%. So again, proving that the market has worked, while at the same time our emissions from all of the other sectors has reduced by only 10%. So the EU ETS has really borne the brunt of emission reductions or driven overall Ireland's emissions reductions. And when you look at our emissions profile here, what you're seeing is over a third of our emissions are agriculture. Then you're looking at energy and transport. And under the effort sharing regulation, we have committed to reducing emissions by 42% by 2030, as well as reducing emissions under the LULUCF regulations. Here comes the challenge. The EPA data, and back to our independent reporting, is showing that we are currently not on track to meet that 42% reduction. And it's the responsibility of my organisation to call that out and to highlight that, so therefore additional policies measures can be put in place so that we do meet those targets. And emissions, as I said, agriculture around 37%, but when we include emissions from land, which is the white diagram there, into our emissions profile, what we're seeing is that emissions from land account for almost 10% of total national emissions. So our land is a net source of emissions, and a significant one at that. So that's where we're at. And we have our EU obligations, but we also have in recent years set out a national obligation. So it's not only what has been done at the EU, but what do we as a state commit to? So we've committed to and set out a national objective at government level to transition to a climate resilient, biodiversity rich, environmentally sustainable and climate neutral economy by 2050. To support that achievement, we've committed to reducing our emissions by 51%, so not the 42 we have to do in the context of the EU, but a higher level of ambition of 51%, and to achieve net zero emissions no later than 2050. And the interesting piece of this climate objective is it is set out in legislation, so it is legally binding. The aim here, because Ireland was often considered a laggard with regard to climate action, is to address that and to have, through the establishment of a strong governance and strategic framework, to support our climate objective. And as I said, this is now set in law through the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act. And the thinking and the logic behind the Act, which was supported by all government and non-government political parties, was that it's not something that changes with each government, that this is something that will It doesn't matter who's in power, that will retain. And as part of this legislation, we have annual climate plans, which sets out the activities committed to by all sectors to support emission reductions. We also have the establishment of 3 5-year carbon budgets and legally binding sectoral emissions. So if you're agriculture, if you're transport, you have a specific reduction commitment, and that is legally binding. There was also the establishment of a Climate Change Advisory Council, an independent body of experts, of which I am part of that council, but we've numerous other experts. And as part of the governance framework, the EPA, my organisation, we report annually on greenhouse gas inventories and projections and inform the monitoring of compliance with that Climate Act, and to say where we're at. And ultimately what we're saying is transformational emission reductions are needed across all sectors to meet our national and international commitments. And sometimes, and I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but sometimes because we're an agricultural nation, there can become, and then we've got a couple of relatively big cities, it becomes a rural-urban, divide. If only all of the farmers would sort themselves out, then our emissions would be fine. And equally, people in rural Ireland say those people in Dublin have no idea what living in rural communities is. And because I'm somebody from Dublin who lives in a rural community, I kind of try to see both sides of this. And areas that I thought might be of interest to yourselves: agriculture and land. So we're very different in scale, absolutely recognise that. But we are similar in that land and agriculture sector play a key role in both of our countries and in both of our countries' climate change response. There are challenges, but there's also areas where real success is possible. We have, as a nation, a really clear cultural, social and economic dependency on land and agriculture that transcends our culture's history. We are from the land. All of us are only a generation or two from the land, from rural communities. So there is a real affinity to the land. We came very late by international comparisons to both industrialisation and urbanisation. So that connection with the land is with us all. And Ireland's land and agriculture sector is a valuable national asset. It provides a secure food supply and economic resources supporting rural communities and national economic growth. As we look towards a carbon neutral future, we see that agriculture will play a key role and land will play a key role in delivering clean energy and opportunities for a more sustainable bioeconomy and the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So our land is going to be absolutely critical into the future. And then when we look at emissions from agriculture, unfortunately the story isn't quite so good, because to date the growth of the agri-food sector has come at the expense of Ireland's environment. This is accepted across all aspects, including the agri-food sector, and it is acknowledged. The latest greenhouse gas emissions show that Ireland's emissions from agriculture actually increased between 1990 and 2023, so it increased by 1.3%. It's kind of gone up and down, and I'll explain that a little bit, because in the last 9 years, there was a rapid expansion of milk production since the removal of a quota, a limiting on milk production. So in the last 10 years, we've had a 40% increase in dairy cow numbers, and that has an impact. And that's what we're seeing. That's why I say the growth of the agri-food sector has happened at the expense of the environment, not only climate, but also water quality and ammonia emissions. However, positive signs were seen in 2023, where we see that greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture decreased by almost 5%, following a decrease in 2022 as well. So we're hoping that this is now, the momentum is, and there's that change. The most significant factor in driving the lower emissions was decreased synthetic fertiliser use. That was down approximately 20%. So it was fertilizer, some of that's because of cost as well as policy. So it's economics as well as policy drivers. So the agriculture sector is a target of 25% reduction, which is huge. So there's a huge amount that then needs to happen. There are commitments around expanding tillage, increasing organic farming, reducing methane output per animal, expansion of anaerobic digestion, but also, of course, we need afforestation as well as part of all of this, and I will come to that in a moment. So there are a wide range of incentives and supports at government level in place, but the issue we're seeing is the scale and pace of implementation is too low. And we need actions such as afforestation, re-wetting, renewable energy. All of these things are needed. And maybe just the last two things I'd like to touch on in my talk is two areas where we're doing a good bit of work and where we're starting to see success, because I always think it's really important when we're talking about challenges to also talk about where things are working well and to have exemplars of things. So forest cover in Ireland is far lower than Brazil, but it's still expected to play a really important part in the future role of Ireland's response to climate change. The ability of our forests to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is going to be central to our legally binding commitments. At the moment, forestry covers only 11% of Ireland's land area, which is really low as compared to the 39%, which is the EU average. However, it has grown from 8%, so it has grown, but our most recent projections are saying that the removals from forests are declining, and in fact forestry is predicted to become a source of emissions in as early as this year. And the reason for that is we have low afforestation rates, so the commitment is there but the implementation is not happening on the ground, and also that the forests that we do have are reaching a harvesting stage. So the challenge facing Ireland is how to turn our forest land back into a sink. The overriding objective of Ireland's forestry strategy between now and 2030 is to urgently expand our forest estate on both public and private land in a manner that's going to deliver lasting benefits for climate change, biodiversity, water quality, wood production, economic development, and employment. So there is there's a goal of incentivising 8,000 hectares per annum, with the aim that by 2030 we'll have that will have increased to 18% of our land will be afforestation. The aim, the ambition is there. What we're still seeing that the ambition is 8,000 hectares, but we're only hitting 2,500 hectares. So we're currently looking at, well, what are the barriers? Are there cultural barriers? Is it economic barriers? Is it administrative barriers that it's difficult for farmers to do this? And all of that is being considered. The second area I'd just like to touch on is wetlands, because this is very much back to association with the land. Wetlands, peatlands are very much associated with Ireland. An awful lot of our land is in wetlands and peatlands. But there is real and meaningful change happening in what was a high impact land use. Around 17%, so almost 20% of our land is covered by wetlands, raised and blanket bogs that were formed since the last ice age. So these are very, very old, very historical, but they've been used and exploited over many centuries. Wetlands were drained and reclaimed for domestic and industrial purposes, where turf was used as a fuel to heat homes, for industry, and reclaimed land was used for agriculture and forestry. And again, I think there's probably synergies here. In the 20th century, large-scale peat extraction took place on raised and blanket bogs. The largest actor in that was a government company. It was a state company, Bord na Móna, and it was established deliberately for that purpose before we knew the environmental impact of destroying all of these bogs. And the peat was used, as I said, for heating homes, but also for industry, because we wanted energy security, so the peat was used in power stations. However, in the last decade, we've seen a significant change in the management of Ireland's peatlands. The company, Bord na Móna, which cut all the peat, announced permanent cessation of its peat harvesting operations, and it closed its last peat factory in 2023. I would say in no small part due to the EPA. Of course, I would say that it's my organisation, but we kept calling out the impact of this. Not only have they stopped cutting peat, but they've commenced rehabilitation of 80,000 hectares of land. So with the aim of bringing around 100,000 hectares by 2030 to reclaim that land so that it's no longer a source of emissions. It also has meant that the company now has changed. It's working in greener activities, working with the wider community in this significant transition, because it is a transition, and there were 2,000 employees, which is a large number of people in the Midlands of Ireland, who no longer have jobs cutting peat. So it's looking at what are the opportunities for these people in other activities, very much around a just transition, including the establishment of a Just Transition Commission, including funding for all of these activities as well, because we've got funding for this peat restoration from both government, but also from the EU as well. So we're, a lot of money. It's not happening. It's not just happening. It's happening because of policy, and it's happening because of investment. So that's what I really wanted to talk about, and just to thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to the discussion now, because I think even we're small, but there's a lot of synergies in what's happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So Isabella, a lot of things, I think, provocations, the carbon markets and the pricing of carbon was efficient, but it is limited, of course, to the industries. Nature-based solutions are, according to IPCC, actually over 30% of what we need to do for actually getting to stabilization of greenhouse gases, and we often forget about that. Restoration and afforestation is certainly a huge opportunity for Brazil, and it's a challenge, and I think is a very good point that we need to work together, as well as how we look at agriculture in terms of promoting sustainable agriculture and actually valuing good practices in agriculture, which often we don't do. And as you were saying, it's not only about the emissions reductions, but it's also the potential that these things have also to make us more resilient to the climate impacts and also more biodiverse. Isabella, what are your provocations with regards to Brazil on those topics? I'm sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. Welcome. Good morning. Laura, thank you for this presentation. Let's see. I'd like to approach this debate in different perspectives. Okay, the other side of the coins, when you come to discuss climate and the environment agenda. This is very important to observe if you need to rethink the future. Okay, and I understand that we did or must. I think we must rethink the future. This is the first point, how climate comes together, not with environmental constituency. It's a big challenge for this country. We need to reframe the environmental governance in Brazil if we want to play strategically as environmental constituency into the climate constituency. And this means that we need to discuss the difference between climate politics and nature politics, or biodiversity politics, because nature is more than biodiversity. And this is a critical issue when you go and to come to combine biodiversity and climate today, like COP16 and COP30, this ambition of the global civil society, how we should merge things. So my first point here, it's important to discuss governance, and when you go, climate governance and environmental governance, when you go to discuss this. If not, probably you have a misunderstanding in a country like Brazil, and you have also something very sensitive that you know better than I, how the rejection, the economic and the political rejection emerge from this agenda when you have this situation in Brazil today. So if you want to move the pieces in the right direction, and I understand that you need and must, we need to understand what are the critical capacities, institutional capacities that environmental constituents must adopt, and also how we come into climate change. Part of this is environment, but in Brazil, climate change is not only an environmental problem. Climate change is a development problem and a geopolitical problem today. So if you're not able to reframe things and to understand the importance of the international dialogue in a transition world, including that we have the international wars changing, okay, it's impossible to move the pieces, consider the pace that you need to be transformative enough to tackle climate change and also nature conservation, nature power, or the bio-age, as I used to say. Okay, not only climate age, it's bio-age together with innovation age. And again, my second point, which countries will be able to have the convening power, okay, to provide solutions in the next 10 years or the next 5 years? This is a very critical issue, an important critical issue when you go to the international debate. Because if you check the numbers on coal emissions, for example, it's increased. It's impressive. When you go to the United States that have an important political policy, the energy policy, to mitigate carbon emissions, this is based on shale gas and shale oil. It's replacing coal, but it's based on fossil fuels. So again, second point, we need to be pragmatic enough to understand if we'll be able to manage phasing out of fossil fuels, in which conditions, and about the costs, and about also security, my third point. It's absolutely important to understand that, yes, you have 1.2, 1.3 Celsius degrees that raise the temperature in average, and this is our reality, this is the baseline, but you cannot forget that we have back the debate about energy security, not energy transition. The wars are there, and the insurance industry, business, is also together with us saying, I'm able to pay for this cost, for these risks. I'm able to consider the costs that we have associated with the transition today. How this will come into climate finance and development finance. And that's why I think that we need to understand the power, it's the right word in my opinion, is the power of bilateral cooperation. I understand that Brazil and Ireland were completely different. Oh, yeah, different. But I like to drink whiskey, okay? Don't forget it. And also caipirinha. But what is really important is not only what to have considered on lands, but also oceans. Okay? And this is part of the agenda that people like to ignore when you go into climate change. I don't know why. But it's a critical issue. Brazil is a country with more than 8,500 kilometers of coastal zone, and the South Atlantic Oceans are on our domain. It is very important to understand how we could combine things, bring together innovative way to manage the development. And why? Because development, in my opinion, is something contextual. It's absolutely contextual. Your development is different from mine. Okay, our perspective of fair, inclusive development is absolutely different. Our perspective of food security is absolutely different. But we understand that we must come together because as agriculture is a key economic sector for both countries, how we should improve our capacities to work together, not only to deal with food security around the world and nutrition around the world, but considering, for example, share methodologies to be used to inventories, national inventories, to understand not only carbon agriculture emission, but the capacity to avoid emissions in agriculture. And unfortunately, internationally, we don't have methodologies with the right accountability in tropical agriculture to measure what is happening based on our reality. If you want to convince people to come together with us, we need to be pragmatic. And I believe that our behavior should not be based on tragedies. I don't like the idea of the end of the world. It's the beginning of a new world. Probably not there, okay? I hope so, but probably not. But what is true is if we're not able to have the new generations together with us, and your new generation together with us, because when I come to young people here in CEBRI, another place in Brazil, they used to say, come on, the next 40 years we are completely exposed to carbon crisis. It's true. This is a problem of the past. I'm sorry. This is what is happening today. It's a problem of the emissions from the past. And you don't have anymore the debate, the right debate about common and differentiated responsibilities. When you go into G20, when you go into like-minded blocs for the debate, this is not part of the debate, Laura, because you don't have this obligation, it's not legally binding political debate. And this is another important issue, because you cannot discuss this based on green wishing. It's not greenwashing, it's green wishing. And you cannot discuss this more based on green protectionism. This is happening today. This is happening, absolutely true. When you go to promote, to convene people to come together to discuss, it's a good example, very illustrative. We come to discuss supply chains and traceability without deforestation. I absolutely agree. Brazil is a country, a creepy country, I think so. It's really creepy that we have half of our emissions based on illegalities. This is incomparable, okay? But let's tackle climate change, let's tackle deforestation. But when going to supply chains, and I'm able to produce food, and I have my supply chains, okay, I can avoid deforestation, but I can add positive things like soil management. Are you able to pay for this? The carbon, the markets are able to pay the price, a fair price? No. No. What is happening today, exactly the opposite of this. So why I'm so trying to go direct to the point? Because we need to have back trust and credibility if we want to move the pieces in the right directions. And that's why bilateral cooperation is important, because it's easier to understand national realities and to agree with common vision or shared vision, and to agree with probably different strategies, but the common objectives, common targets. And that's why I understand that financial tools is very important for this debate. It's not only, and I agree, the carbon market is absolutely important, your numbers are really good, but in Brazil you have this, how can I say, this political situation about the carbon market debate, that this is part of the democracy or democratic process in National Congress, and also the lack of understanding, this is my personal opinion, what is happening in carbon market internationally. But also it's true that we need fair price for carbon. So why you pay a lot, much money in developing countries, and you go to Africa or some other countries and follow the price not so fair? So, and you want to discuss fair, inclusive, and just a transition? Come on, this is fake, okay? And my point is that that's why I believe in bilateral cooperation, that it is easier that you can agree how you must come together based on what you showed to us here, like agriculture, but also in Brazil, I think that's very important to discuss trade. This is really a critical issue today. It's not only with the Western world, but with the non-Western world. You don't need, for in my country, to unlock or to lock some countries that we understand part of the equation. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how to do this, how to explain this, you have the geopolitical game as part of this equation now. And this is true, absolutely true. Okay, I was in New York now, I have a huge debate about this, and absolutely true. Finally, we need to understand the role of the politics into the negotiations. And sometimes it's like we're on the world a part of. And I'm sorry, it's not true. Everything is absolutely interconnected, everything is absolutely part of the debate, and bilaterally, we need to understand, if we have some diplomatic difficulties, how we could solve this together. How we could come together without misunderstanding about our commitments, and without any trick situation when going, for example, to debate about phasing out or phasing down of fossil fuels versus renewable energy. Or when you go into tropical agriculture in Brazil, and we are provider of energy based on the biomass, and international markets don't recognize this based on, for example, ethanol and sugarcane. They prefer to recognize things based on the wind power, etc. Come on. Come on. This is unsustainable politically. Okay, this is something that will bring people a part of, not as part of the strategic debate that we need. Finally, I think that you asked me to provoke. I'm trying to provoke. Okay, finally, I think that's very important to understand what is coming. Okay, I'm arriving here in Rio today. I was in the flight reading the newspaper, you have today in international press an assessment about what is happening in Baku and how the key players, business players, do not come to attend the conference. Okay, and this is part of the international strategy that will allow only 4,000 people there, not more 100,000 like Dubai, and probably this will have the same in here in Brazil next year in Belém. Okay, this is part of the climate governance that under the United Nations umbrella. Okay, but we need to understand that we have new dynamics outside the United Nations umbrella and United Nations systems that this means that we are discussing climate change. G7, G20, BRICS Plus, and other like-minded blocks, but also business sector. And this is something, for me, very important bilaterally. How we should come bilaterally, come together, consider business sector in Brazil and also in Ireland. Okay, and why? Because even we are so different, I understand this, but if you have a common understanding and common experience that you could share, for example, climate risks perspectives, how would you like to approach this? How indeed we can minimize risks in the country like Brazil and Ireland because we are able to come together. This means that we have opened rooms with innovative debates based on solutions. And this means that we here in CEBRI, together with Maria Neto, we are discussing now a new networking of think tanks that we named T30, not because of COP30. I like that people think about it, but this is not what we're thinking. But okay, let's, indeed we are looking for to address 30 countries or 30 countries that are solution providers. Okay, and how could it have this alignment, political alignment, consider the biggest economies in the world, and also other countries that could really be solution providers and come together? Because probably you can figure out better how you can manage a solution in the next 10 years. And we understand, based on our experience here in Brazil and also in G7, the importance of think tanks, because they used to come closer to the governments and also to the society. The big challenge is how to bring society together and how, consider the next COP in Brazil, to have the global society back, okay, into the COPs. And this is really a big challenge because the last COPs, unfortunately, we didn't have the full access of civil society. But for this, we need to frame better what we have. Okay, and it's not only to go there to have side events, etc. How the civil society will be committed and share responsibilities with the future. And this is something really tricky because it's so complex, consider the transition that you have today. And again, environmental concern, environmental agenda is something really attractive. No, everyone's understand. It's like soccer, no, football. People think that they understand. They don't understand, but they believe they understand. It's the same on environment and climate change, okay? They absolutely believe they understand. Even us, we don't understand. Finally, one point that I'd like to highlight, consider bilateral cooperation, really a huge opportunity, is democracy. Okay, we are countries from the Western world, we share Western values, and we are part of democracy global game. We have around 70% of the global population today that lives under autocracies. So it's very important for our societies to learn how we could improve our democracies, how we could improve the society's engagement, how we could improve transparency and our commitment to change things. So if not, again, we keep playing based on bubbles, on clusters, that people believe by themselves that, okay, I'm done very well. It's not enough. The world changed, and you need to change. And I hope that we can change together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabella. Lots of provocations also looking towards the future, trying to unlock also some kind of more and more protectionisms and the need for thinking out of also the box in terms of having more frank conversations of what is needed, and the role of bilateral collaboration also. I have some questions, but before that, I would like to give the opportunity, I don't know if in our floor, we have some people who like to take the floor. Can somebody help to bring the... There we go. So I see Emilio. We'll take 2 or 3 questions and then we turn to...
Good morning. I'm Emilio Larovere, professor from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to all the panelists for the remarks. I would like to address my question to Mrs. Burke. First of all, thank you for this presentation. I was particularly happy to learn that Ireland has shut off the last peat facility last year, even before UK shut off the last coal mine last week. And we had some cooperation with Ireland back in the times of the oil crisis. I used to work with the government. We also have some peat in the state of Bahia here. but Brazil is blessed with cleaner energy sources and went for renewables. But coming to my question is on this connection between climate action and environmental integrity. As one of the first traditional members of the European Union, how Irish government and Irish consumers would would feel what would be the appetite about discussing together with southern countries, for instance, Latin American countries, common standards. For instance, for the European Union directive on products with deforestation footprint. We have an opportunity now that we have 1 year delay in the entering of the regulation. We have some standards in Brazil and in other Latin American countries. For instance, in Colombia, we have Carbono. It would be very important to have consultations, to have common standards just before discussing about targets and deadlines in terms of not only for the voluntary carbon market, as is being the case today, but as you know, Mexico has already a cap and trade system. Brazil is passing a bill at the Congress in this moment on a regulated carbon market. We will have a methodology for carbon emission reductions and removals to be done, a registry, and I think how the agriculture, the forest sector will be treated, particularly in Latin America. We've been seeing, I'm chairing a carbon market watch for CAF, for the Latin American Development Bank. We've seen a lot of experience, and nature-based solutions are very key for Latin America, which is quite competitive in the carbon market on that, while Asia, for instance, is much more competitive in renewables or energy efficiency because the baseline has much more carbon footprint than in Latin America. So we would like, I think, to have a multilateral approach. Is that feasible? Is there appetite? You think that we can engage on consultations on this subject, or will be just an unilateral move by the European Union? Thank you.
No comments. So maybe we start with this question. I think maybe adding to Emilio, I think would be very interesting to, if you can elaborate more, because I think that's speaking about the bilateral opportunities that Isabella mentioned. The idea of the restoration, the afforestation is a big opportunity in Brazil, but I understand even for your size, you are looking at that. And we have similar challenges. It's expensive, it's complicated. How we can work together to scale this? And have a common understanding in the EU, because maybe not all the countries in the EU have the same view as Ireland around the opportunity of restoration. And this, now I'll be a bit politically more provocative than Professor Larovere, to say that, you know, in the Article 6 negotiations today in UNFCCC, the whole topic of removals by sinks has been kind of frozen, whereas, at least for restoration, this should be a conversation open as an option for emissions reductions recognized. And we have been always putting this a bit into question because of the question of permanence. So I guess the provocation is a bit that as well, how we can talk about that in terms of methodology and opening a space for dialogue also with the European Union on that.
That's an easy question, as we say. And I will come to that, but just on the peat, because I think it is an interesting one, and I said that the main company has stopped extracting peat. No more than in Brazil with regard to deforestation, that doesn't mean there's no peat cutting. That means there's illegal peat cutting and actually export of peat out of the country. So one of the functions of my organisation as an environmental regulator is to target those illegal operations. And we've used the legal system, the court system, injunctions against companies successfully. But people who operate illegally can be very innovative and imaginative, and we find that we are really having to put a huge amount of effort and time into it. So I would not want to leave a completely rosy picture and say, Ireland is great, we solved it. We've done a lot of work, but it takes an awful lot more work, and it's back to your piece of governance and implementation on the ground. It's great to have theoretical practices, but how does it work on the ground? And we are the environmental police, so we have a strong activity in that space. On the idea of common standards in the EU, I suppose I need to be really clear. We're a member of the EU, and it is an EU negotiation. So ultimately, that's how it will play out, because we can't kind of separate ourselves, and we wouldn't separate ourselves. But this idea of bilateral engagement, of course, we need to learn from each other. And Isabel, you were talking about areas for convening power, areas where there can be trust and discussion. I think there's a huge opportunity in that space, and that learning from each other. And even, as I was saying over my visit over the last number of days, learning from practical things on the ground, that's where I would see an opportunity. And raising issues then, whether it's through the UNFCCC or the IPCC. So, for example, Ireland was very successful in the context of the IPCC to bring agriculture into discussions, and to get, actually, there was a special report on agriculture that Ireland led out on. So I think there can be many ways to raise these topics and to have the learnings, and I would see opportunities in that space, definitely. And as I said, we're doing restoration. There's things that are working equally. I'm sure in Brazil there's examples of where things are working, and try and create that bit of momentum. But yeah, on the common standards, there has to be, but there's limitation on what can be done bilaterally there.
I'd like to add 2 comments. Again, we're strengthening the importance of bilateral cooperation dialogue, because, of course, you can have the global understanding and agreement and deals, political deals, but we need to understand, as you mentioned, how to ground things and to understand the national realities. You mentioned that you are people that we are from the land. Your quotes, it's very interesting. We are from the land, but I think that you don't like it so much in Brazil. Yes, now we are from the forest. Now we have different. Brazil is so, we have really a huge diversity in this country. It's fascinating. But what I'm trying to say here is that, okay, 2 things about deforestation. The first one about illegalities and also organized crime. Okay, you have really a different step when you go to tackle deforestation today in Brazil. It's not only Brazil, it's an Amazon region. And of course, that we need to recognize that Amazon region is an international concept today. Okay, and this is why, my first point, bilateral cooperation is important. To understand what really is happening in the country, on this region. If you go among the 8 countries that comes together in the Amazon basin, you have different 8 realities. So it's very important, really, to have the right lens to approach what is happening and how you could come together, not only to block the international trade based on illegalities because the developed economies buy for it. I'm sorry, what's happened with illegal gold mining in Brazil, 98% that was illegal was bought by developed countries, European countries. Let's face the problems, okay? Let's avoid that could not recognize that you share responsibilities in this process. So again, bilateral cooperation will allow us to have a common framework to recognize where we are and how we should come together, which kind of barriers must be removed, which kind of strategy must be adopted as a transition to make sure that both consumers here in Brazil and also in Irish people could buy things and Brazilian citizens could buy things without illegalities. This is really a common understanding because I don't need to come into beef production in Brazil only to avoid deforestation beef production because of international market. 75% of beef production in Brazil are consumed by Brazilians. Okay, so I need that Brazilian that like beef. I like beef. I'm a biologist. Okay, don't worry. And so I think yes. Okay, and for me, I love the day that we go into the supermarket. All Brazilians could like to eat beef, could buy it without any doubt about any legality in the supply chains. And this means what I'm trying to illustrate here, how we need to come based on realities. Okay, we have an ambition, but we need strategies. It's the same when we go in DCs. I'm back to Maria because I know that I think that you like to approach this. When we go the new cycle of NDCs next year, how we should come really based on reality to implement things. This will become investment plans. This will become shared development strategies that could come with private sector and business sector and also financial sector from our countries bilaterally to understand that our public policies really they are based on really critical reality to come together to remove barriers or not. Okay, so it's like, again, in my opinion, we need to understand when we go to deforestation. Deforestation is a huge umbrella. You have illegalities, you have the challenge in this country of national forest codes, how to restore peasant on a law that our baseline put really a huge restriction on additionality when you go to carbon markets. We need to be creative. For example, when you go to restoration of legal reserve, based on the law, you can remove the fruit trees and go into native species, and this is additionality. So we need strategies, but we need to understand that we have partners that will pay for this. If not, it's waste of time. Okay, it's waste of time. So I think that, again, Maria, I understand that we have really huge opportunities, but I'd like to provoke everyone to have really green pragmatism, to sit at the table and to discuss based on reality what we should do together to change things and be co-beneficiaries of our common strategy. Back to you.
Laura, respond.
It's such an interesting discussion, and it resonates because everybody's interested in the Amazon, but coming in and telling somebody else you should protect something that I think you should protect it without any implications. The consequences for me is you're preaching, and I think this idea of understanding what's really happening in a country is really, really important, and it is a shared responsibility. And overall, in the context of climate change, it is a shared responsibility for all of us. And that piece about paying for it at a micro level in Ireland, we're having exactly the same discussion, because we are saying to our agricultural community, which we encouraged and supported and incentivized to operate in a particular way, 40% increase in dairy cows, saying, no, you shouldn't be doing that anymore. You need to diversify, you need to change. And the farmers looking at them saying, that's fine, but it's my livelihood. It's impacting directly on me. So how are you going to support me, incentivize me, give me security that if I change this way, that I will have a livelihood? And I think, as I said, at the micro scale in Ireland, we're having a discussion on it, and it carries equally for when we're talking about the macro and the protecting. Because unless we understand each other, unless we understand the impact on people, my my sense of it, of course, you will always have, we have an expression in Ireland in the context of legislation that 5% will not comply with legislation no matter what. There will be around 25 that will comply no matter what. And there's 70% that will watch and see what's happening with the 5%, and then they will decide where to go. And I think that's the critical piece here. But that piece of bilateral and understanding, because otherwise we're talking at each other. Again, at a local level in Ireland, agriculture is a very sensitive environmental issue. I've sat with agricultural community and they say, I hate the EPA. I hate you. I hate everything you're doing. You're against my business. And at the end of the conversation, I've had them come up and say, I hate the EPA, but I like you. You're all right. So if we think if we can work with people on a human basis and understand their challenges, most people actually want to do the right thing if they're supported and incentivized. There are always criminal elements, there are always illegal elements, but they need to be targeted.
Laura, this is the same challenge that we are having in Brazil, and that's interesting because currently there is, I think, interesting also dynamics with agriculture in Brazil. Of course, there is the avoided deforestation and the issue of deforestation, but let's put it aside a bit. As you say, our agribusiness, and let's talk about cattle ranching, which is a common issue, is also important for the economy of Brazil. It's actually our GDP depends a lot on it, right? And there is the same perception that, you know, particularly with the association to deforestation, there is a kind of a demonization as well, no? At the same time, I think there is increasingly an understanding that ironically is a sector that is particularly vulnerable to climate change and that needs also a lot of attention to that. So, and that engagement, as you were saying, needs to be a new engagement. So it's interesting, for example, in Brazil, a lot of conversations currently with the 5% most likely is about, for example, with our Ministry of Agriculture on what can be done to do, for example, pasture recovery, because there's a lot of degraded lands. Maybe that's a big difference for us. Brazil has over 40 million degraded lands. I'm not talking about the Amazon. I'm talking about the business, okay? Our agribusiness, soy and cattle, has over 40 million hectares of land that is degraded, which could be recovered pastures, for example, okay? And those areas, if they are better used, and in particular, for example, if we start talking about regenerative agriculture or associating forests to cattle, it's not only anymore about the carbon, it's more and more about the productivity, and is more and more also about adaptation, because Brazil, as I mentioned, next year will be inflation, because we have the big losses on our agriculture production this year. And that, you know, the conversations that are happening now in Brazil is the ABAG, which is our agriculture association, was fighting a bit with the government, saying we need more insurance. Now, insurers don't give money for free. As far as I know, no insurer gives insurance to pay. So the point here is also how we start even looking at good practices to resolve the vulnerability. Will not resolve the fact of having losses eventually now and then, but at least start having a more proactive conversation. So this is a very good provocation now, Isabella, to think about these bilateral conversations with the 5% that are more open to have this conversation, because maybe this is the way that the EPAs or the discussion on environment can start becoming a truly understood conversation, that you need to change the way you do business, but you can also be a part of the solution. No?
May I? I think that I like too much when you said that they hate you. Here they reject us. It's worse. Okay. Yeah. So hate is a feeling, you know. You can. It's close to love. Okay. Rejection is something really, really hard, okay, to manage politically. But not my case, okay? It's something that I'm so happy because I'm out of the government, so I'm free. But I have really a good trajectory politically when it comes to discuss agriculture because of forest code negotiation and also genetic resource access law. But what I'm trying, it's important to highlight here two things. In the case of Amazon region, and we understand that we need to protect because it's not only because it's a climate security for the world, but for Brazil. And that's why last year when President Lula had the meeting in Pará last August under the Amazonian Cooperation Treaty, the letter of Belém makes absolutely clear that 8 heads of state signed for the first time in our history, signed the political message, recognized the tipping point of the forest. This means planetary boundary. Okay, it was the first time that head of states recognized this. And unfortunately, the world didn't recognize this. It's like, this is when you go into the lack of trust and credibility, when you know how complex it is for diplomacy to build this process, okay? And finally, we come to say, we have this. Why this is important? It's not only because of planetary boundary, because in Brazil, Brazilian Amazon, you have 28 million people that live there. And we need to preserve and provide development. We need to go into public health. We need to go into infrastructure. If you go to developing, you need to develop bioeconomy and social bioeconomy. We need infrastructure and logistics to manage this. If we go into supply chains, we need to build markets. And this is not easy without really a common understanding about challenges and the transformative process that will take time, not only money. It take time. It's a really new way to approach things. So this recognition that Amazonia must be protected, that's why I mentioned this is an international concept, okay? In a tricky situation politically and diplomatically. And the other side is that, come on, let's solve the problem of 28 million people that live there. Not only indigenous people consider their lands and protect areas. They live in cities. 80% of the population lives in cities. So again, when you go to, I hate you, because I learned that to avoid hate is to, come on, let's understand what are the common challenges that we could share as challenges. The difficulty in the environmentalism, as part of the environmentalism, unfortunately, don't want to consider the trade-offs. And you have the short-term perspectives. And short-term perspectives is very interesting because it's like finance. Finance world modeling things. When you go to the business sector, they're discussing about debentures, about the finance, the shareholders, and let's discuss sustainability in the long-term perspective. Come on. This means that we bring finance versus governance. When you go to sustainability, it's the same in climate change. Climate change is now different because we have climate risks into the room. Okay, and these people trying to understand, to figure out better what it means. But it's very interesting when you go into this debate that we need to understand how to manage short-term and the trade-offs in short-term perspectives. Okay, it's a case of, that's why I brought the issue of solutions. Okay, you understand that don't have a lot of countries with solutions available, and also, for example, when you go to solar power, okay, what are the technologies that through the domain of China? Who wants to play strategically with China today? We play in this country, but another country around the world, unfortunately not. So let's block and let's keep with coal and other fossil fuels. So it's also the other side of the coin. We need to have a mature debate about fossil fuels and phasing out in the world. Okay, it's not a green wishing again. We need to be pragmatic to understand how dependent we are and how we manage restoration, how we recognize removal, nature-based solution, removal things, natural removal things as part of the equation, and really with something that we need to come together with accountability metrics. If we're not able to trust, to build our trust, considering this, forget it. Forget it. And unfortunately, or fortunately for us, the solutions will come from emerging economies and the global south. And that's why my last point here to explore, because we have not only because I like Irish and whiskey and also Mary Robinson, but we have a really good friend. We share a good friend, a lead of natural resource outlook and natural resource agenda, natural resource panel. It's important to understand the role of natural resource and materials, okay, and materials. And that's why people in this country used to say that circular economy is based on recycling. It's not true. Circular economy is based on natural resource efficient use and now sufficient use. So Brazil is really important provider of natural resource. When you need to understand how we could use this better, because natural resource connect nature and climate change. Check the scientific numbers and you can see this. I'm co-chair of the International Resource Panel, the scientific panel responsible for this, and I know we know the numbers, the importance of the numbers. So again, it's very interesting for me how you could decouple things of the global perspectives, land things bilaterally, and have this back to share rooms that to make clear that you can provide solutions. I understand, Maria, and I absolutely agree that we need to move considering adaptation, resilience, etc. I understand that restoration, afforestation, this is absolutely critical, but you cannot forget that we need metrics, accountability, we need transparency, and also measure better the risks, because we have fires, droughts and fires as part of the equation now. Okay, you don't know about the extreme events, but this is something that is happening, and probably will keep happening. Okay, what's happening today in Florida, the second hurricane, it's something that absolutely out of the game for us, what is happening there. So it's impressive how we need to come together to understand better the problems that used to happen in the past, how these problems will happen in the future. It's absolutely different, absolutely different. And finally, I understand also that we have some 4 critical issues that must be addressed. First of all, science. How we can go into regional and national science that could be recognized internationally. If you're not able to come together bilaterally, our institutions, our universities, etc., to work together and to have common methodologies, research to how we can manage climate change in different realities, but the numbers, the acknowledgement, we're producing this together, get out. It's over, okay? Second point is trade. Okay, and this is very important. I understand that we have European Union rules and will measure, but we need political voice on both sides. Okay, as we come from land, we also, okay, let's try to have a common language to consider our difference, but we understand the world. Agricultural world understand agricultural world. It's true. But our tropical agricultural world, we are also energy provider. And this is something that people must understand, okay? Without going against food production. And this is very interesting because we need restoration, we have land for restoration. And this is really a good point to agree. My third point here is about innovation. How would you like to share innovation? Meaning when you go, for example, critical minerals or fertilizers. Your numbers about fertilizer or biofertilizers is very interesting. Nitrogen, but it's very interesting to discuss this, considered tropical and non-tropical agriculture. And finally, I think that carbon market is really a critical issue, okay? Voluntary and regulated, and also other ones, diversity, how we could use this better when you come bilaterally. Okay, so if your company is able to buy, even if you go consider the 6.2 article, and you have additionality, and you have to understand, have a strategy to manage this outcome, we are based on this in the next 30 years or 20 years, this will be easier to explain to the world how we agree and how we should come together, must come together to make sure that this is a solution. If not, with scale, as we like to highlight. If not, probably only small scales, and probably the strategy based on Leonardo DiCaprio that unfortunately for Brazil, this is not enough. Okay, thank you.
So now I will give you some words. I think we're close to the end. So if you want to give your final words, I think Isabella put a lot of new challenges for topics with a lot of ambition towards the future. Yes?
And loads of opportunities there. This working, I think, yeah. just in case. And maybe to start where you were talking about cattle ranching, and you kind of saying they're demonized but feel vulnerable. Demonizing anybody when you're trying to get change, in my experience, doesn't work, because people get entrenched, and back to what you were saying, Isabella, about kind of common understandings and trust and all of those sort of things. And we see the same to a certain extent in beef farmers in the west of Ireland. It's micro again as compared to Brazil, but people are saying they shouldn't be having beef farms. But if you're not beef farming, what do you do? And so you have to give viable solutions to people. That idea of, you know, degraded land and looking then at good practices where you reduce vulnerability, those good practices are critical, because no matter whether it's a farmer or it's a business leader or whoever it is, people listen to their peers. And one of the things that we've been doing in Ireland and working with our Agricultural Research Institute is celebrating those successes where farmers are doing things really well. And the pride and the enthusiasm and the energy that you get from those farmers, and it has to be economic as well as environmental sustainability. It can't, you know, there has to be a viability, but not only the farming community celebrating those success, but getting public recognition for it has certainly worked. And this piece maybe not, people don't always have to do something good because it's for the climate or because it's for the environment. If the result is it's good for the climate and good for environment, great. And that's the key piece, is you want the result ultimately is what the outcome is, what we're interested in. And those accountability metrics are critical. You know, we have to live in the realpolitik. You know, there's no point talking about things and having greenwishing, which I love, you know, we can all aspire. You know, it's back to the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. We have to actually show deliverables, and that's each and every country. And trade-offs, and our mutual friend will talk a lot about trade-offs, and I think at a European level we're starting to talk about that, because I think back to the pragmatism, we need to realize that everything has consequences, and not talking about trade-offs and just talking about a nirvana when it can be win-win-win, there are issues. You know, if we're talking, for example, in Ireland about offshore energy, potentially there are some trade-offs in the context of biodiversity or other things, and it's what is the right balance there? But it's to have the mature discussion so you can make a considered decision is really, really important. And I'll finish maybe on the bilateral, because I think there is huge opportunity. Look, recognizing we're within the EU, there's EU decisions that will be made on certain things, but there are huge opportunities to work together. Scientists, scientific bodies working together. Like traditionally, historically, that is all. Science is work with scientists. They don't get into the geopolitics. And I think that is a really large opportunity. So we back to learning from each other and learning from experiences. And that bit about the land, you know, agriculture, energy, all of these things that the land, you know, we're debating and trying to make that change. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And ultimately, innovation, because we always have to evolve and change, and things that happened in the past, you know, whether environment or across businesses, you know, they're no longer in existence. We're no longer in the, you know, the Stone Age or the kind of Industrial Revolution, etc. Things change, and there's huge opportunity in change. We sometimes always think about the negatives of change, but we have to look at those opportunities. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we are over the session now. It has been very dynamic and interesting. We have, I think, Robert making some closing remarks, and then Isabella as well for CEBRI.
Thank you so much. As a practicing diplomat for more than 20 years, involved in different multilateral negotiations, we almost spend more of our times having the deep discussions in the corridors, and when we're having coffee together. The sharing the experiences, listening to each other. I've been at enough meetings where a monologue is delivered, another monologue is delivered, there's a response, and we're not listening to each other. So you said one of your tasks, Isabella, today would be to provoke. You have. I'm mildly terrified about what that might mean for my future, and at the same time, very excited. There are opportunities for things that are happening here. We've learned some lessons for what worked in Ireland and what really didn't. Changing people's behaviours. We were speaking earlier on about behaviour patterns from younger consumers thinking completely differently. Solution that doesn't necessarily lie in, old people like me. It's younger generations, completely different mindset, just will not accept that was the status quo. No, that's just not acceptable anymore. So provoking us is important, and listening to each other is important. I feel like this is the first chapter of what's going to be a very long book, and I really look forward to more chapters, more inspiration, sharing of ideas between our two countries. I think it'll be a rich and interesting book. Thank you, and thank you to CEBRI for bringing us together.
Close remarks? No, CEBRI, no, so I changed everything. Shift my mind. No, I'd like to thank very much all of you for coming. Please be welcome. I understand that we have really, that's why I try to be so provocative. We had really opportunities to come together, better than we're doing today. I know that when going to governments, bilateral dialogue used to have a slow pace. I understand this. That's why I'd like to invite you to come together with CEBRI. This is an open door, together with civil society in Brazil, to understand better how bilaterally you could come or must come, and also to provide some additional inputs for the bilateral diplomatic dialogue. Okay, I learned a lot in my professional life that government used to need inputs. Sometimes they don't recognize this, but they used to need inputs. We, as I mentioned, we are democratic societies, and this is very, very important to mobilize not only the new generations, but our generations, but more than this, to understand that we must come together bilaterally as really important society that could be provider solutions. And this is very, very important, consider this transition. And my last comment, I highlight the issue of trade-offs. We need to be smart when to go in trade-offs, okay? You probably are not able to move to solutions everything, or to solve everything, sorry. But trade-offs also very important to, for example, to access funds, money, to increase the social protection of our societies. It's not only adaptation by adaptation, okay? It's very interesting when you go into civil rights, not only human rights. It's absolutely important to understand the dynamics of the world in short-term perspective. This means conflicts and migrations. We need to understand how the Western world will behave in the next 10 years. And this is very, very interesting, okay? If you're not able to come together as Western world, Western society, we share values, it would be impossible to come together with non-Western world. So I think that trade-offs could be better debated when you go to understand our demands in the short-term perspectives, and also how you could figure out better our challenge in short-term perspectives. Not only the climate risks or vulnerabilities and tragedies, new COVIDs, etc., etc. I still believe that you can have new lens to see the future better than we are looking at this moment. And it fully depends on us. Thank you very much for coming. You have a branch now, okay, for all of you. And be welcome always. I hope that you like Rio de Janeiro. And next time, we need to go to Bahia. We have go around Brazil, be absolutely in love, and probably Hans. Next year, Hans will be here, our friend. Come together with us, okay? And don't forget, next year, Brazil will be absolutely, with all the events, global events happening here, but we have the World Circular Economy Forum in São Paulo. And back-to-back to this forum, we have the International Source Panel Scientific Meeting Okay, this is very important. The most important scientists in natural resource will be here in circularity in Brazil. It's a huge opportunity. I will manage to have a close meeting with the scientists in Brazil, with the university in Brazil, to discuss based on climate change and nature class. This is a new way to approach climate and nature politics. Okay, welcome to democracy and to politics. It's a fascinating world. I don't understand why people don't like to discuss politics. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I'll have a drink, some juice, and please be back. Okay, thank you.